Good morning. Thank you for joining us here this morning. Just want to welcome all the Galena Park members. Thank you for being with us. Hopefully soon we'll be meeting here in person, but for now we're still recording our sermons. For those that are not from Galena Park, my name is Francisco Banda. Most people just call me Frank or Frankie, and I answer to anything. Welcome, and thank you for being with us. Today we're going to be in Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. So if you want to turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 7, verse 31 through 37, that's what we're going to be at today. But we're also going to be in Isaiah 35, so if you want to mark Isaiah 35, we're not going to read it, but we are going to reference to it. I am going to reference to it, and we'll probably look a little bit into Isaiah 35, so go ahead and mark that in your Bibles as well. I am using the Holman Christian Standard Bible version. If you have that in your Bible app, you can use that so you can follow along with what I'm saying. But any version that you have, you feel comfortable with and that you have is fine to read along with. So we're going to read a story in Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. This story is only found in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark. It's not found in Matthew, Luke, or John. Although Matthew does reference the time that this takes place, he does reference that. But the actual story is we only find it in Mark chapter 7. It is also a very short story. So you're probably saying, good, it's probably going to be a very short sermon. It might be. We'll see here in a little bit. But it's going to be a story about Jesus healing a man. And we're going to read this short story, and we're going to try to get as much as we can out of it. It is a great story as I was reading it. It's a great lesson that we can learn from this story. And I'm going to try to convey this lesson that I've learned through reading through this story. And I'm going to try to convey it to you, and hopefully you will understand this story and what we can find in this story also. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. So let's go ahead and just go into it. Mark chapter 7, verse 31, starting in verse 31, it says this: Again, leaving the region of Tyre, he went by the way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, through the region of the Decapolis. So we see here Jesus walking, taking a trip, and he's walking to the edges of the borders of Israel, close to Syria and that area. And he's walking along, and he comes to Decapolis. Decapolis is a region of 10 cities. And they all kind of have the same culture, the same languages. This is more of a Gentile area. And that's why it's called Decapolis. It's 10 cities, a region of 10 city-states. But he's walking through all this. And this is not a short walk. This is a long walk. We're not talking about days. We're not talking about weeks. But we're talking about months that he walked through this. And he's walking along with his disciples. And I can only imagine as he's walking along with his disciples that he's teaching them on the way. As they walk along, as they camp out for the night, as they stop, he teaches them. And he's trying to teach them. He's trying to reveal himself to them. Remember, he's trying to, throughout Mark, that's what the Gospel is Mark. Mark is trying to reveal who Jesus is, who Jesus really is. And here's Jesus. He's walking with his disciples. And he's taking months walking through this region, and he's teaching his disciples the whole time. So we can only imagine what Jesus is teaching them, and we know that he's trying to reveal himself to let them know why he's really here, why he came, and he's trying to reveal himself. Now, Decapolis is like I said, it's a region of 10 cities, mostly Gentiles, and this is a region that Jesus has been before. In fact, if you remember the story about the man possessed by a legion, and then Jesus took that demon, the legions, out of him and put him into the swine or into the pigs, and the pigs ran off to the cliff. This is the same area where Jesus is dead. And when he did this miracle, he told the man that was possessed to go and tell everybody in the area about what had happened to him. And the man went, and the people were amazed of what happened to him. So this is the area where he is now again coming to, and he comes to this region of Decapolis. So this being a Gentile with a lot of Greek influence, Hellenistic cities, we can always be assured that in this city you will find temples and statues of all the gods that the Gentiles worshiped. And we can only imagine that Jesus sees all these things. He sees the temples, he sees the statues, and he sees all this idolatry around him as he goes through this region. So that is where Jesus is at. He's in the region of Decapolis, and he is teaching his disciples about himself. Verse 32. They brought him a deaf man who also had a speech difficulty, and begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. So the first thing we see is that they brought a deaf man. So who's they? And here Mark doesn't say who it was. He doesn't name names. It could have been the disciples that grabbed somebody and brought this man. But it most likely was friends and family, because they say that they begged Jesus to heal him. So they brought this man. It doesn't name them. They're anonymous. They're not the main point of the story. Jesus is. So who they were is not so important to this story. And I think it's the same way for you and me. When we go out and bring people to Jesus, are we trying to focus on ourselves and look what I did, look who I brought? Look, I'm converting these people, I'm talking to them and they're converting, and we lift ourselves up and we want our names to be known, or we want our church to be known as Galena Park. Oh, look what Galena Park is doing. Oh, look what Frank is doing. And we want to be known for our evangelism, or we want to get known by name. But we see in this story that the names weren't mentioned. That they is not the important. They're not the focus. And I pray that as we bring people to Jesus, and we talk to people about Jesus, that we do not make ourselves the main focus. That we do not make our church the main focus. That the person that we make the main focus is always Jesus. That the main person in our story will always be Jesus. Just as Mark here writes, that they brought him a deaf man, and who also has a speech difficulty. I hope that is our purpose also, that we would not focus on ourselves, but we will focus on Jesus, and only on Jesus, and not try to build our own name or try to make a name for ourselves. And I hope that's the way it is with us here at Galena Park and whatever church you go to. So we see that anonymous people, brought a deaf man and who also had a speech difficulty, and begged Jesus. So we see that they had a close relationship with this man, because they went out and they begged Jesus to heal this person. So most likely it was a family or friends or a part of the community, and they wanted Jesus to heal this man. They begged Jesus. We are reminded of many stories in the Bible where once friends tore off a roof to lower a man down so Jesus can heal. We know the woman who reaches out to try to reach the hem of Jesus. We see people trying to come to Jesus, and they're working, and they try all they can to get to Jesus. So we see here that they brought this man to Jesus, and they begged him. So we see they have a close relationship. We see that they have a personal relationship with this man. He is not a stranger. He's not just someone they just bring to Jesus, but they have a relationship with this deaf and mute, or this person who cannot speak very well. So they bring him to Jesus, and they beg Jesus to heal him. And I hope that's the way it is with you and me. When we get to know people, when we become friends with people, when we have a personal relationship with people, and we see that they need Jesus, that they need healing, that we will come and we will beg Jesus to heal. Because it's always about a personal relationship. So they brought him a deaf man and who also had a speech difficulty. Now I was listening to a couple of Bible scholars. One scholar says that this man probably was deaf since birth, and that's why he had speech difficulty, because we've seen it and we know today that those who are deaf have a hard time speaking because they cannot hear their voice. And luckily today we have advanced speech therapy, and we have hearing aids, so it'll assist them in being able to speak. But back then, they didn't have these things. Another Bible scholar says, well, this is probably more later in date, that this man had an accident, perhaps an accident, and that's why he's having a hard time speaking. That's why that he's deaf, and it came later on. But in either case, whichever case it is, I think what we need to look at here is where it says they brought him a deaf man and also a person who has speech difficulty. A very interesting, very important aspect of this story is speech difficulty. The Greek word that is used here, and I'm going to see if I can pronounce it correctly, is moglilalos. Moglilalos is the Greek word they use, that Mark uses here in speech difficulty. What's interesting about this word is that this is the only time in the New Testament, which was written in Greek, that uses this word. Moglilalos is the only time it's used in the New Testament. So if you're curious, as a Bible student, if you're curious, you go look in the Old Testament. Well, when is this used in the Old Testament? Now, the Old Testament was written in Aramaic and not in Greek, but it was translated into Greek. It's the Septuagint, and that's a Greek translation of the Old Testament. Well, curious enough, you look for that word, moglilalos, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, and there's only one place in the Septuagint that word is used. And that place is in Isaiah 35. So let's look at Isaiah 35 real quick. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm just going to go over it real quick and see where it's used and how it's used and why it's used. And the interesting part of it being used in Isaiah 35 and Mark chapter 7. Now in Isaiah 35, it starts talking about God. If you read verse 4, it says, "Say to the faint-hearted, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. Vengeance is coming. God's retribution is coming. He will save you." So it's talking about God saving Israel, God coming back to save, to redeem, to bring retribution, to bring reconciliation. Here is God is coming for that, to save and to redeem. And then in verse 5 it says, "Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer," verse 6, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy, for water will gush in the wilderness and the streams in the desert. So in verse 6, when it talks about, "and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy," it uses that word, moglilalos, in Greek. So we see here that this is a prophecy about Jesus. When God comes to redeem, when God comes to restore, when God comes to save, when God comes for reconciliations, He sends Jesus, and the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped, and the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the moglilalos will be open. And that's where we find moglilalos in Mark chapter 7. The only two places in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament and the New Testament, that we find that word. And we see that it correlates about God saving, about God restoring, about God reconciliation with God, and that is only through Jesus Christ. So Mark here is saying that this is who God is sending to save. God is saying Jesus is the one that's going to be the one that God sends to save us, to redeem us, and the eyes of the blind will see, and the deaf, their ears will be open, and the mute will be able to talk. And it's talking about Jesus. So Mark is trying to reveal who Jesus is, and He is the Christ, the one God sends for us to be saved. So they begged Jesus to lay His hands on him. So we see that they have a relationship with this man. we see that this man was deaf and had a speech difficulty. The world today is deaf, and they do not know. They have a speech difficulty, and they do not know. They are blind, and they do not know. See, the world is seeking for peace and joy and contentment, and they think they know, but they are blind to the real peace, the real joy, the real contentment. The world is deaf. They think they hear everything, all the philosophies they hear in the world, all the things they hear in the world about peace, joy, and contentment. Yet they do not know the real joy, peace, and contentment because they do not know Jesus. So they are deaf to those things. And they have speech difficulties because they speak about joy, and they speak about contentment, and they speak about peace. But those words are empty because they don't know the real joy, the real peace, and the real contentment. No. They don't know about love. They seek love everywhere. They want to be loved. They want to be in love. But they don't know what love is. They are blind to it. They are deaf to it. They speak about it. But those words are empty because they don't know Jesus. And only through Jesus Christ would they know what real love is and what real love is all about. And they will know real love only through Jesus Christ. But they are blind to it. They are deaf to it. And they speak difficulty. They have difficulty speaking about love because they do not know the real love. Because if we can only know the real love, we know Jesus Christ. So they begged Jesus to come and lay hands on him. Verse 33. So he took him away from the crowd privately. And I can just imagine. And it brings tears to my eyes. It brings, just touches me and deep down. When I read this, that Jesus took him privately, took him away privately. And I can only imagine that Jesus goes to this man who probably doesn't know what's going on. They can't communicate with him. See, when back then, when someone was deaf and could not speak, what did they think about him? They thought he was demon-possessed. He was an outcast. He had sinned and he did something wrong, and that's why he's that way. But we see Jesus here, he doesn't push him away. He doesn't just heal him and let him go away. But he takes him away from the crowd privately. And I can only imagine Jesus putting his arms around him and bringing him to him and bringing him away, making it something personal with him. And Jesus touches him. This person that people may think he's unclean. This person that is an outcast. This person that people think maybe he's demon-possessed. But Jesus I only imagine that Jesus put his arm around him and took him away from the crowd. And we see that in Jesus' ministry. When he heals the leper, where nobody touches, who is outcast, and nobody wants to be around, who has to scream, leper, leper, so everybody can move around from him. What does Jesus do? He touches him, and he heals him. That's what Jesus is. He touches. He reaches out. He makes it personal. It's not from far away. He doesn't line people up and heals one. It's not a assembly line where he heals one and then the next and heals and heals. That's not Jesus. It's personal. We see how personal it is when Jesus, he takes this man, and I imagine in my head, I imagine Jesus putting his arms around him and leading him away from the crowd. I can only imagine what this man is thinking. What's going on? Why is this man taking me away? Why is he being so kind to me? Why does he show compassion to me? He's probably confused, wondering what's going on. And Jesus is not communicating with him because this man is deaf. And this man cannot ask, what are you doing or what's going on, because he cannot speak. can only see that Jesus puts his arm, I imagine Jesus putting his arm around him, and he leads him away from the crowd to have a personal encounter with him. And that is what to know Jesus. That is what is knowing Jesus, to have a personal encounter with Jesus. It's not an assembly line where you just walk by, next. No. Meeting with Jesus is a personal encounter. And I imagine this is what Jesus does. He takes this man personally. He takes him away from the crowd. And I can just imagine as he gets him away, and they're staring at each other, and he can't talk, and he can't communicate with Jesus, and he can't hear what Jesus was telling him, what Jesus ain't telling him either, because he can't hear. So we see what Jesus does. After putting his fingers in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue. So nowadays we have sign language where we can communicate with those who are deaf. We have many advances in health where we can communicate with those who are deaf. So back then I seriously doubt they had anything. So what does Jesus do to communicate with this man? To let him know what he's about to do? He touches those areas where he is ill. Those areas that are not working. He touches his ears to let him know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to heal this. Then he touches his tongue and he lets him know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to heal this. And I can imagine that man not even able to communicate is starting to understand what Jesus is going to do. And I can then see that and almost imagine him starting to get excited as Jesus points and touches his ears and touches his tongue. That man is starting to probably understand what's about to happen as Jesus communicates with him. Just as Jesus communicates with us. In those areas in our hearts, in our lives that we are faltering in, where we are ill, where we have failed, and where we have feel guilt and where we have sinned, those areas in our lives when we come and have an encounter with Jesus, when we meet Jesus, he touches those very places. Do you have a dark heart full of hatred? When you have an encounter with Jesus, he will touch your heart. Are you having difficulty with a sin? When you encounter Jesus, he will touch that sin. Are you having difficulty with your thoughts and not understanding perhaps? Perhaps you don't see no purpose in this life. Perhaps you're depressed, filled with anxiety. An encounter with Jesus, he will come and he will touch those very places that you are struggling with. And he will let you know, this is where I'm going to heal. This is what I'm going to heal. This is what I'm going to do for you. And it's a personal encounter with Jesus. And he touches those very places. So we see as he touches this man's ears and he touches this man's tongues, he doesn't heal them. We read in other stories where Jesus will touch the eyes of a blind man and he will be healed, but he's not doing that right here. He's communicating with this man and he's letting him know what's about to happen. He wants to communicate with him, just as Jesus wants to communicate with us. He wants to tell us how much he loves us. He touches those very places in our hearts, in our lives, in our thoughts, and in our bodies that we are struggling with. He wants you to let you know that he can heal those parts. He can heal those struggles. He can heal those difficulties. He can heal that depression, that anxiety, that sin. And he wants to touch those places in your life and heal them. Verse 34. Then looking up into heaven. So as this man looks at Jesus and as Jesus is trying to tell him what he's going to do by touching his ears and his tongue, Jesus looks up to heaven. He looks up to heaven to the God of Israel. And he's showing this man that's what's about to happen comes from heaven. It doesn't come from the statues of all the gods they have. It doesn't come from the temples of all their gods. But it comes from the God of heaven. Jesus looks up to let him know what's about to happen. Comes from a God that loves him. Comes from a living God that hears our prayers. Comes from God above. Just as when he touches our lives, we know that it comes from God above. That God loves us so much that he gave his only son to die on the cross for us. So Jesus looks up to heaven. He sighs deeply. And I can just imagine, remember, this man's deaf. He cannot hear. He cannot talk. And Jesus takes a deep breath. And we do that. We can see our body move with that deep sigh. Letting that man know that something's about to happen. But I believe that it's not just that. I believe that Jesus takes a deep sigh here because Jesus wants something better than just healing our broken parts. He has come to reconcile us with God. He has something greater, but he takes a deep sigh wondering, will they understand? Will this man understand? Will this man know why he came? And we see that a lot. We see that a lot in people these days. I know I was talking to somebody once, and he was telling me all the difficulties in his life, how he was going through a hard time, and that he prayed, and God did a miracle and took him out of these difficulties. But what did he do next? Did he dedicate his life to God? Did he start serving God? No. He went back to just the way he was before, getting himself into more difficulties. And I think that's what Jesus is doing here. He sighs, and will they understand? Will they understand that the miracle that's being performed here, that what Jesus is doing here is much greater than just healing our broken parts? They understand. Do you understand that Jesus came for something so much greater than just healing our broken hearts, from taking us out of difficulties in our lives that we got ourselves into? Jesus came to reconcile us with God, to give us salvation, to save us, to pay the price of our sins. He came for something much greater. And does he sigh in your life? When Jesus thinks about you, is he sighing? Is he going, I just wish you understood. I just wish he knew who I really was. Because that is what Mark is trying to tell us here, who Jesus really is. That he is the one that God sent to save us. The blind will see, the deaf will hear, and the mute will talk, says in Isaiah. The one when God comes to save. And it is through Jesus that God saves. And do you understand? Or does Jesus sigh at your life? Because you just don't understand. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed deeply and said to him, Ephphatha, This is an Aramaic word, and Mark doesn't see fit to translate this word into Greek. He leaves it in Aramaic because that is what Jesus speaks. Ephphatha. And it says that is be open. That's what it means. And you can just imagine as this man that's deaf, who cannot hear and cannot talk, cannot communicate with Jesus, as he's looking at Jesus, as he looks at his face, as he looks at his lips, and Jesus pronounces words, Ephphatha. And he can read his lips. And he reads his lips. Because this word is such a word that and you can communicate this word just not even saying the word, the sound, but just mouthing this word. Be open. It can be seen in your lips. Be open. Immediately his ears were open. His speech difficulty was removed. And he began to speak clearly. Immediately. As Jesus says, be open. He heals him. Just as he heals us in the broken parts in our lives, in the struggles we have, most importantly, he heals us immediately when we accept him as the Christ who came to save us from our sins. He heals us immediately when we say, I believe with all my heart that Jesus, the Son of God, that he died on the cross just for me. And he paid the price that I deserve to pay. And we will be healed immediately from those sins, and from death, and from shame, and from guilt. He heals us immediately. Ephphatha. Then he ordered them to tell no one. But the more he would order them, the more they would proclaim it. They were extremely astonished and said, he has done everything well. He even makes deaf people hear and people unable to speak talk. It's very curious. Here he tells them not to tell anybody. He did not go and say anything. Where before when he was in Decapolis, he told the man, go tell everyone of what just happened. And here Jesus is telling them, don't go tell anybody. And I imagine perhaps they just don't understand. They see Jesus as a miracle worker, probably a magician, probably just as any other priest of a god that's performing something, some miracle, some magic. But they do not really see who Jesus really is. That is what Mark is trying to tell us here when he uses that word. Mo Lalos. When it compares them to Isaiah 35, when God comes to save, that is who Jesus is, the one God sends for us to be saved. Sometimes we don't see him as that. We see him as a miracle worker. We see him as our servant. God, Jesus, take us out of this trouble. Get me out of this trouble that I got myself into. Jesus, do this for me. Jesus, do that for me. And he becomes our servant. He becomes a miracle worker, but no more than that. And how can we speak of someone whom we really do not know? If Jesus is just a miracle worker in your life, if Jesus is simply a servant for you to ask to help you, then how can you talk about Jesus? He ordered them not to talk, to say anything. And we see in verse 37, they were extremely astonished and said, he has done everything well. Is that what you do when someone does a great miracle? Oh, he does everything well. I believe they don't really understand who Jesus is. Who Mark is wanting us to understand who Jesus is by this story. That he is the one that God sent to save us, to reconcile us with himself, by making the deaf hear, the blind see, and the mute talk. So how is Jesus in your life? Is he just a miracle worker? Is he just your servant? Or is he the Christ, the Son of God, who came to save you from your sins? They brought him a deaf man who also had a speech difficulty, and begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. Now I want to mainly talk to Magdalene Park members, but if you're listening from some other church or just found us here, this is also for you. They brought to him. It does not say that they brought him to church. They brought him to Jesus. And yes, we find Jesus in our churches. But they brought him to Jesus. And we need to understand that, brothers and sisters, here in Galena Park. These four walls here hold us in. We've seen people, other Christians and people in other churches wanting to come back to church, demanding that they be allowed to have church. When we should be demanding and we should be inspired and we should be wanting to get out of the church, out of these four walls, and go out there to the world and bring them to Jesus. All we want to do is come back to church, surrounded by these four walls. And I'm afraid that we even in our virtual churches now are building our virtual walls, trying to keep it all the same, when we have the opportunity to get out of our churches and go out into the world and bring them to Jesus. That's what we got called for. Don't get me wrong, brothers and sisters. I long to see you guys again. I long to come back to this church and to gather again and to sing together and worship together and to pray together and to study together and to fellowship and to be around each other. But that all has a purpose. And that purpose is to get out of these churches and go out there and bring them to Jesus. They brought him to Jesus. That's what we ought to do. And you're probably asking, well, we're out there, but we have this thing called social distancing, and we got these restrictions about staying around our houses. A week and a half ago, I was in my front yard doing some yard work, and my neighbor, not my next door neighbor, but 2 houses down, came out to his front yard. And he looks over and he goes, "Hey, Frank, how you doing?" And I reply, "Hey, I'm doing good. How are you? And how's your family?" And we start talking and we start yelling at each other. He's 2 houses down and we're talking to each other. Having personal contact. And at that time, I didn't have a chance to speak the gospel to him or tell him about Jesus. But as you build those personal relationships, just as they brought him and begged Jesus. They had a personal relationship with this man. So as you build your personal relationship with those around you, then you can bring them to Jesus. Throughout this time that we have been out of our churches, God has brought people into your lives. God has brought people to cross your path, for you to do good, for you to show them God's love, for you to be that city on the hill, for you to let your light shine, to glorify God, and you to bring them to Jesus, for you to bring them to Jesus. We're out of our four walls. That's not such a bad thing. There was this thing called diaspora, or the dispersion of the Jews, and they went all over the kingdom of Rome. And then when Jesus came and Christianity began, and then the Christians were being persecuted, the Christians dispersed. And they went all to the kingdom of the empire of Rome. And they began to meet Jews everywhere. And they began to tell them about the Christ, Jesus. And Christianity began to grow because they were out of the churches. They were out of the norm. Just as we are. We're not going back to persecution by any means. But we are away from these four walls. Again, don't get me wrong. Church is important. This is where we learn. This is where we fellowship. This is where we lift each other up when we come together. But the purpose is for us to go out there. We learn, we worship, we pray, and we encourage each other so we can go out there again, outside these four walls. And even outside the virtual four walls we are building now. As we all try to have church online. We have a great opportunity. And the Word of God and the gospel can be proclaimed if we only get out of our four walls, whether physical or virtual. The world is blind to the great love of God, Jesus. The world is deaf to the true love of God, Jesus. Yet they speak, but their speak is difficult because they make no sense when they talk about love. For we know the true love. Because we know Jesus and God, and they showed us what true love is. It's time that the world learn that we bring them to Jesus. I was online on YouTube. I don't know if I was listening to a sermon, probably a sermon to get some more input on this topic. And I don't know how I got there, but you know how YouTube, you start going down a path of bunny trail and you end up watching videos that you don't know why you're watching. Well, somehow I wound up on a video. And it's a video of an autistic 10-year-old boy who's blind. And it's a video of this boy who's blind and autistic, 10 years old, and he sings a song. And he sings, "Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you high and lifted up. Has God touched us that way? That the physical difficulties that we have in life don't matter. But what we really want is the eyes of our hearts to be open so that we may see Jesus. See, that's what the world is looking for. They don't know where to find him. It is up to you and to me to bring them to Jesus so that he may touch their hearts and he may open their eyes and he may open their ears and he may make the mute talk again. And he will touch them. And he will have that personal encounter with him. But that is only if we bring them to Jesus. Not to church. Although they can find Jesus at church, don't get me wrong. But it's up to us to bring them to Jesus. And it doesn't matter if anybody recognizes us, whether our name is proclaimed anywhere, whether anybody will give us credit for bringing them to Jesus, that doesn't matter. The main character of the story is Jesus. He is most important. His name should be proclaimed, not ours, not our church. His name. Open the eyes to my heart. Open the eyes to my heart. I want to see you. See you high and lifted up.